Today is September 29th, 2014. We're here at the Black Mountain College Museum and Art Center in Asheville, North Carolina. My name is Erin, Dickey, and I'm talking to Ted Dreier, Jr. So Ted, you wanted to start off by telling us a little bit about your life. So why don't we do that first?
Okay, one reason I thought it might be a little helpful to talk about my life is that a person's life is a little bit of a lens through which I think one sees and expresses things. So if I give you a little capsule of that, then at least there would be that background. That's one approach. So I was born in Albany, New York. My father at that time was working for General Electric Company, and we lived up there till I was a year and a half. But then he decided to go back into teaching education, which had been an interest of his. So we went to Rollins College in Florida, and when I was a year and a half, and stayed there for about 3 years or more. And as people who know the history of Black Mountain College realized, there was a disruption at Rollins College around John Andrew Rice's big outspoken problems that he raised. And so a lot of people resigned, and some people said, let's form a new college without trustees, where we run it ourselves. So a group of small people ended up in North Carolina, just a little bit east of here, where we are now, at Black Mountain. And that's where Black Mountain College started in 1933. So I was 4 and a half when I got there. That's just to give you a little bit of a background of that. So I grew up as a kid in Black Mountain College, and since we lived in the dining hall, since we lived near the dining hall and went down there, I didn't have to be with my parents for any meals necessarily, though we had some meals at home too. But I would sort of mix in with the whole community and became part of it, and even entered into some plays and things like that. So that was my childhood entry into Black Mountain, and I felt part of that community. And there was the question then when I got to school age, where is this kid going to be educated? And so my parents wanted a kind of a good and a sensitive and maybe an artistically open education for me, and where was that going to be? So the solution was that the first grade I was taught by a student at Black Mountain with 2 other faculty kids, and that was fine. But then she left, so then public school. So we went down to public school in Black Mountain, and that was quite a different atmosphere there. And there was kind of a little bit of a aggressive hierarchy there, where kids showed who was tough and who was going to be the boss and who could push other people around and stuff like that. So I got pushed around. I said, help, hey, I'm not used to it. And tears came down, and I didn't know what to do. But then I sort of settled in and sort of had a nice teacher, and then had a productive year. But it wasn't ever very comfortable in a certain sense. So my parents then arranged that I would go to private school in Asheville, along with a couple of other faculty kids, Asheville Country Day School. And that was small classes and friendly teachers, and I enjoyed that, and that was for the 3rd and 4th grades. And that was nice. And then there was also a disruption in the hierarchy of that school, and the head of the school was fired under faculty, under parental pressure. So my parents said, well, there's a total unknown what's going to happen here, we better put him back in public school. So I went back to Black Mountain in the 6th grade, And by that time, I wasn't going to be pushed around quite so much, but I had an okay year, but it wasn't very stimulating exactly. So then my parents found that the Asheville Country Day School really had recoalesced and was doing okay. So then we arranged I'd go back there. So anyway, it just shows you I was hopping around quite a lot. But then there was a choice. Where does he go from here? So there were some boarding schools nearby, one of which was some of which were, I don't know, I can't remember the names exactly, but my parents were not too comfortable with them. And they decided to help me with an experiment, make an experiment, because there was the Asheville Farm School, which was a vocational school, half-day work and half-day school, that was then renamed Warren Wilson Junior College. And by the time I went there, there was 2 years of college. Eventually went up to 4 years. But we still worked half a day, every day. And the head of agriculture there was somebody that my family really respected, and had called over for a consultant to the farm at Black Mountain. And so when they decided to squeeze me in there, I actually boarded with them for a little while, and then they found a room in the school, in the regular dorm. And we usually got dumped out of our beds a little bit as just part of the introduction to the whole bond. Yeah. So, but that was interesting. It was so I worked on the farm there for the first quarter, and then for the next quarter I said, well, I want to try some other things too. So I got into climbing up telephone poles and learning to repair them and stuff like that. And that was kind of interesting. So that went on for that year, and it was sort of a mixed blessing, but I enjoyed it. But and I, in a way, got a little bit huskier, and I'd also changed my name, which had started out Quintus the Fifth Theodore, and my friends couldn't pronounce that, so they said Quintus and Kinney. So I grew up with Kinney, and then, but I said I didn't want to keep having that name. So when I went away to Asheville Farm School, I said, my name is Ted. So that's what we did, and that's when I grew into that name. And but there was not kind of the richness of education that my parents and I would have liked. So one of our students at Black Mountain had also been to the Putney School in Putney, Vermont. And he talked to my parents about that, and they had not only art and music and good academics and a work program too. It was a little bit parallel to Black Mountain. So I managed to get into there and went there and graduated from there. And did fairly well and enjoyed it and learned to ski up in Vermont in the cold weather. And then luckily got admitted to Harvard and Swarthmore and Black Mountain. And I chose Black Mountain for 2 years. Went there for 2 years. And I guess we'll talk a little more about that. But then when Black Mountain was going through a big disruption, I needed to decide what to do, so I then decided I would go to Harvard. And they first were wondering whether to give me any credit for what I did at Black Mountain or not, for 2 years' work. So they first settled, compromised on sort of 1 year for the 2 years. And but by the time I got there, people had raised questions about that. So they said, we're not going to give you any credit at first, we'll see how you do. But we had already put you into upper class dorms at Adam's house, so you go right ahead, go in there, and we'll see how you do. Well, luckily, things work out okay, so I ended up getting 1.5 years credit for my Black Mountain work at Harvard, 2 years. They didn't give me total credit, but everything. And I graduated from Harvard in 1952, and majored in music, but had a great experience with John Charlie as a poet there, and then thought, well, it would be really good if I had more cello experience, because I just started playing the cello at Putney School, and didn't have a teacher at Black Mountain, but kept playing, and then had a good teacher when I came to Boston area. So, but I then went to Northwest Deutsche Musik Academy, Northwest German Music Academy in Detmold, Germany. And we'll go on in just a moment.
Okay. Maybe go ahead and continue.
Oh, I can continue.
Yeah,
Okay.
yep.
So wait, Northwest German Music Academy.
No. So, was admitted to Northwest Deutsche Musik Academy, Northwest German Music Academy in Detmold, Germany, and spent a year there, and had a great adventure in Europe, being a student there, and went to Paris and a few other places also. But at the end of that time, we all decided I would probably be happier if I remained an amateur musician rather than trying to be a professional, because I really wasn't that technically good as a professional. Well, I loved playing, but so then there was the whole question, what shall I do? And there was a question mark in my mind too. But meantime, my parents had heard about a chance to, they had heard about an interesting psychiatrist who was creating treatment in a home setting. His name was John N. Rosen, and he lived in the Philadelphia area. And so he was looking for assistants to help create this home setting for individual patients, which he would then give a specialized, focused treatment to. And so it turned out he was willing to talk to me and said, yes, I'll hire you, and we can see where it goes from there. So I had a very interesting experience there, got interested in the whole field, and decided I think I'd like to be a psychiatrist. So went back to doing part-time work and part-time study at the University of Pennsylvania to get my to do my pre-med work. Went to Temple University Medical School in Philadelphia to do my medical training. Interned in San Francisco General Hospital, and then came back to the Boston area and did my residency at Mass General Hospital, McLean Hospital, Children's Hospital, and settled in this area. Eventually, as I got older, went into geriatric psychiatry too. And then I've retired from that, enjoying things. But meantime, did get married, and happily with my wife, and we had, she had 4 kids with a widowed husband. I mean, she was widowed because her husband had fallen off a mountain, and but I adopted those kids, and we had 2 more, and had a lovely, rich experience. And they've moved on, and I've retired, and interested now in Black Mountain and some other things.
Indeed. So you've given us sort of that sort of capsule of your life, and let's go back now to your time at Black Mountain College. Do you recall, what's your first memory of the college, of Black Mountain College? It could be an image or a sense, anything.
I don't have one specific first memory that's prominent, but since we lived just up above the dining hall, and I have sort of memories of going down into the back door of the kitchen and then joining in for the eating breakfast and everything else. And I do have one fairly prominent memory that happened fairly soon with Joseph Albers, as it turned out, because all the faculty and students and faculty kids all ate together, mostly. And so Joseph Albers he had come with his wife Annie over from Europe. They did not have any children themselves, but so he sat beside me once and he says, you know, in Germany what we do when you have soft-boiled eggs, we cut off the top and we give it to the kid. So that's what I'm doing for you now. There, enjoy. And that was sort of fun, and that just stayed in my mind forever.
How old were you, would you say?
I think I was 7 or something like that, yeah.
So you talked about, you live behind the dining hall. Could you go into some of your impressions of the physical aspects of Black Mountain College?
Well, it started out in Blue Ridge and had a lot of interesting kind of childlike explorations there. But what's very striking, of course, is to be out on the porch of Blue Ridge Lee Hall, the big building there. And it's just a wonderful view. And people would just sit there sometimes, all of us, and it was just take it in. It was just very special. But then there was, in the lobby, there was a lot of sort of grouping around, and there would be meetings inside, or there could be meetings outside. And then between the back of Lee Hall and what no longer exists now, but there was a kitchen dining hall, and there was a whole little space in there, and that became kind of a community space. There was lawns to sit on, you could spread blankets and so forth. And in the back of Lee Hall, there's also, on the top of the first floor, there is a roof, a flat roof. And you can climb right up it, up the fire escape. And all the students and a lot of the faculty would just lie there and toast in the sun. So it became kind of a nice combination way to have some fresh air, some warm sunshine, and to be part of a group too, if you wanted. Or you could just read, or you could mutter around or just sleep. There was a great deal of freedom there. And then, but there was also, in between, there was this lawn, and the people would spread blankets and things like that there, and we would, together, looking at a couple of little pictures on those blankets, where, since Alan Sly, who was one of the music teachers there, who got the whole community playing these bamboo flutes, because he says, you can do it, let's all become part of this. And so faculty and students and kids even would take advantage of learning to play these little flutes, which they gave group lessons in. And so on the pictures we were looking at, there was one picture where Albers was, I think, my mother was playing a little flute to Albers, and my father was playing a little flute to my mother on a different picture. And that was all kind of fun. And we kind of all joined in as a community, just a little adventure.
Yeah. So you talked about other kids. What was family life like at the school?
Well,
Either your family life or that of others?
yes. Well, I would say like our family life, a lot of the meals happened in the dining hall. But we would sometimes have our own meals at home, and usually I guess we'd have at least one little gathering around the table per day at home, and if anybody was sick or something, we stayed up there. But we were otherwise kind of interacting with the community quite a lot. But family life was also would happen.
Yeah. So do you remember, did you ever sit in on classes before you became a student? An official student?
I think not much. Well, I take that back a little bit. I mean, for instance, some parts of classes would be, in drama, for instance, Robert Wunsch would be saying, okay, part of our work in this class is to put on a play. And so they would put on these plays. And then I would get called in to play the kid's part or something like that.
Which plays? Do you remember some of the plays you were in?
Well, I particularly kind of remember one that was...
And then you can start again. Thank you.
Which plays? Do you remember some of the plays you were in?
Well, one of the plays I sort of prominently remember was Bury the Dead. I forget the author of that. But that involved a whole lot of the community. It involved, actually my dad was in it too, and he played an editor or something like that. This whole story was there was a group of people who'd been killed in the war or something, and shot in the war, but they wouldn't die, or they wouldn't be buried, or something like that. And so I was going to play the role of a little newspaper boy. I guess I was 7 or 8 or 9 at the time. And so I would come out at the beginning of the play and extra, extra, you read all about it. They won't be buried, they won't be buried, extra, extra. And it was sort of my way of kind of being part of things too. And there was another play I was in, and I forget the author now, but it was a family life play, and I played the part of a young kid who would sit around at the table and mutter and have little bantering comments with people, and things like that.
What about the first official class you took when you became a student? Do you remember that first class? Or even any of the classes that sort of stood out in your mind?
Well, there's quite a lot of classes that stand out in my mind, yeah. And actually one way I've written some poems about them, so one way I could get across some of that would be to read the poems and then talk about it.
Sure, let's do it.
Should we do that? This was Remembering Black Mountain College, 1933 to 49. Theodore Dreier Jr., also known as Quintus, Kinney, and Ted. So just giving me the spectrum there a little. And then this first little beginning poem, Yes, I grew up, or partly grew up, at Black Mountain College.
So talk about that a little bit. What made you end that poem with a
Well, just that I wanted to sort of point to some unanswered questions, and to sort of hope that that might therefore introduce the other poems in a way, to some of the experiences. So one of my great interests was music, and there was a wonderful teacher there named Charlotte Schlesinger, whom we called Bimbus, and I studied with her. And then Mervyn Lane was a big husky guy from New York, and had been to the New York School of Music and Art, but was sensitive too. And he played piano beautifully, and he also wrote poetry and things like that. So we were kind of half buddies in a way too. And so I'm going to write a little poem that describes how he and the teacher produced a very intense little concert. And the word concerts all the time at Black Mountain, and people would just sort of gather around, or it would be Saturday nights or something. So this is how I started out. Bimbus and Merv. That night, Bimbus, Charlotte Schlesinger, and Mervyn Lane at Black Mountain College, 1946, played on 2 pianos in that moldy old dining hall, J.S. Bach's Concerto for 2 keyboards in C major. Ooh! That last movement, the fugal entrances sparkling and surging ahead like trumpets in a symphony. Applause then, applause now. I'll never forget it. And the whole next day, people were just talking about it. You know, it was something just so intense and memorable about it. It was just wonderful. And even Merv himself, he was starting to repeat it to himself, and he wasn't playing it as well as smoothly when he did it. Then he would sort of smile wistfully to himself. But it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And so my whole learning of music there was with Charlotte Schlesinger and also Irwin Bodkey, where we listened to education or playings of Bach and Handel and Mozart and keyboard music and things. And lots of interesting things like that too.
Yeah. And then you also took a class, or did you take a class with Charles Olson? Was he ever a teacher of yours?
Oh yes, absolutely. So Charles Olson, he had come there sort of for a few weeks at a time the first year, when I was in my last year there, 1948, 49, I think. And I really enjoyed it. I guess it was in the fall. He came a few weeks at a time, and then he mostly stayed the whole time in the spring semester. And it was really an important and meaningful part of my life. And though there's a little preamble to this poem that I will give you as a preamble, that I also had a wonderful teacher there named Mary Carolyn Richards, M.C. Richards. And that's where I sort of started out, and actually Merv Lane was in there too. And it was a fairly small group, but we were all invited to write some poems for that. So I wrote some poems. I guess I wrote a poem, and I was sort of wondering what to do, and I wrote a little bit this way, a little bit that way, and whatever. And so when we came to reading our poems aloud in class, why, Merv Lane said, "Ooh, Dreier, oof, I don't know what to say about this. I won't say anything." Anyway, it obviously was not a well-written poem, but he sort of spilled out. So M.C. Richards said, well, I mean, people laughed too, and I laughed too. I mean, it was good-natured kind of stuff. And things settled down a little bit, and M.C. Richards said, well, okay, let's read it again. Let's read this. And she read it, and I said, well, I kind of think that I can see why Merv just didn't feel he could connect with that. But on the other hand, let me point to some of these other phrases, and I think there's a certain sensitivity here and a certain awareness, and I think I'd like to see that develop more. But when it comes down to it, I don't really see how this poem is connecting with something that's important to you in your life. So I'm going to have a suggestion to you. write a journal and write it down every day. You know, what you see, what you observe, what you feel, and put it into words, and then just keep doing it every day. So I did. And I brought some other products of that back to the class, and she said, okay, good, keep doing it, keep doing it. Then she left. Charles Olson came. And so I was still writing this journal in a way. That was the main way I was writing, doing writing. And I would write down sometimes what would happen in class where Olson and everybody was too. So then when we had to hand in some, hand in papers to Olson to look at, I put a little note saying, please do not read aloud in class, because I didn't want to embarrass myself or anybody else. But what I'd written about what I was observing of what people were or were not doing. And so, therefore, what he did was he kept that rumpled into his shirt pocket. And when he saw me coming out of the dining hall, he grabbed me and said, let's talk about it. So that's a long preamble, but that's why the poem sort of grew out of this little encounter. So this...
Where you wanted to start, sorry about that.
Okay. So this poem is entitled That Moment with Charles Olson. He called to me on the path outside the college dining hall, and out of his scruffy coat pocket, he pulled the paper I had given him, now all rumpled. He looked me straight in the eye and then said, with his booming voice, listen how this sounds. You wrote, my heart is sad with thoughts. Well, we all feel that way, or we have felt that way, but I do not feel the words connecting with me or connecting with you. But over here where you write, Uli will go on feeling confident in Paris. I feel yes, connection. And I like the cadence of that line. It invites me to move with it. So keep on writing, and I'll see you in class at 2 o'clock.
So Charles Olson is sort of thought of as this outsized personality and this outsized body. As a young man, what was your impression of him? What did you think of him?
I found him a friendly guy, very tall, and with a little bit of a twinkle in his eye, and he kind of get going in one line or going in another line of conversation or something, but willing to come back and listen and be responsive to what somebody else brought up or thought about too. So I liked him, I really did, yeah.
And then M.C. Richards, she gave you that advice about writing your thoughts down and your observations down in a journal every day. Do you think that advice had, what did you take from that advice? Did it have any effect on your studies later or your life later?
I think it was a very helpful advice because it wasn't just sort of writing in a diary, but I was asked to do it by a sensitive teacher who thought that it could be meaningful to me to do that. So it enhanced the kind of attention that I brought to what I wrote, I think, in that way. And I would maybe just write things down, but then I'd look at it and maybe write something else down. So,
yeah. So your father, Ted Dreier, in addition to being a founding member and also teaching at the college, was also the college's treasurer, which certainly was not an easy job. So what do you recall of your father's attitudes towards the work that he was doing and how he approached it in those years?
Well, that's a big question, and covers a lot of different experiences. But I feel at the core of it was a kind of enthusiasm for the project of having Black Mountain College. And then when there was this issue and that issue and this issue and that issue to deal with, okay, they had to be dealt with, but somehow we keep the college going. That's a good project, and it has great possibilities, and nothing is exactly to be known for certain how things will turn out one way or another. But I think there's some fascinating, talented people here, and somehow bringing us all together in a community, interacting with each other, that we can have a creative response to that. So that's one thing.
Will you talk about your father? What was he like?
He had, I'll make a few comments. I don't have anything clearly well formulated here. But he was basically a nice guy. He had various experiences, and a lot of interests, and it seems like quite a job to talk about my father.
What's your favorite memory of him? Or a vivid memory, we'll say.
Yeah, I have quite a few of those. I suppose it's just hard to pick it. It's more that things were happening in kind of a flow of interaction, and I wasn't ever trying to judge them over this is very special.
Yeah.
But he was a warm, good-hearted guy. We would go out and play, throw a ball back and forth. We would do things like that. He'd read to us at night.
Do you remember any of the things he would say to you?
Well, I do, but somehow nothing comes right to mind as you ask that question. I guess it would have to come up out of certain situations.
We can come back to it.
Okay.
Yeah. You talked about the character of the college community, and you told a story on the tour of the campus yesterday about the calf, a calf that was born.
Yes.
Will you tell that story?
One of the things my dad did was to encourage the whole existence of the farm and the farm work, and he helped administrate that quite a lot too. And so anyway, and he talked with Ross Penley, the farmer, and things like that. And so the college did have, I think, 3 heifers that were started out to be just part of our beef herd, I guess, like that. So one of them was pregnant and delivering a calf. And there was a great difficulty with this. It was her first calf delivery. And so that it went on for a long time and wasn't happening, and the vet was called, and they tried to give some other injections that would help it move along faster. And partly seemed to move it faster, but it partly wasn't solving anything. And so somehow people in the college became more and more aware of this, an expanding group, and so it became a bit of a college crisis in a sense. And then finally the calf was born, but it was stillborn, dying. And so I just remember seeing it there, you know, very clear, white, little, wet haired skin on its face. And it was just something, and the poor mother was just totally exhausted, kind of. So it was quite an experience, and I was somehow involved in seeing quite a bit of it too. So, and then there was conversation around the dining room tables in the cafeteria and dining room of the college, and so that was special. But just having that experience of a death, and the death of a baby calf, it had kind of an impact on all of us. And in a sense, brought a little bit of a bonded sense of sympathy as we expressed our feelings about it to get together, I think.
Okay, hold up just a second.
And about how old were you then? Do you remember at that point?
I think I must have been around somewhere between 12 and 14. I can't remember exactly.
And I believe also yesterday on the tour you talked a little bit about the death of your brother Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Will you say what you remember about that experience?
Let's see. Brother Mark was 9 when he was killed in a car accident at Black Mountain. So I would have been around 12 then too. And I think what we as groups of kids would do would be to sometimes go up the river. We'd go down to the stream and then up the stream and play around in some of the pools that were up there and have fun and stuff like that. And then walk back along the road. And so we were doing that, and we were doing it with at least one of the farmer's kids. Well, the farmer at that time was Ross Spinley, and one of his kids was Jack. And it was about the same age as my brother Mark. And so as we were all walking along together, Jack Lipsy, who was the black cook of for the college, and revered and admired guy in some ways, drove along and said, "Oh, anybody want to?" Or he stopped and said, "Hi, how was the swimming?" or something like that. And anyway, one way and another, I can't remember the conversation, but Jack ended up on the boat, holding on to the outside of the one side of the car, and my brother on the other side. And if anybody can remind me of what those little boards used to be.
The running boards.
The running boards, right. So they were standing, feet were on the running boards and they were holding up. And the river had actually, I mean, the road had been affected by a big flood quite a lot, so it was a lot of bumps in it. And so they drove off down, getting a free ride back toward the college, and I stayed, I think, walking along with maybe Gertrude and maybe my brother Eddie or something like that. But then it turned out, I guess, that something had happened. That car hit a bump, and I think turned over. I think, and on the side of my brother, and so he was killed. And so I didn't know that for a little while, and then when I came back, somebody had been set up to direct us toward home and not have us see the big mess that was there. And so I then heard about it a little later. And that was a big impact, but it had an impact on the college too, because it was all part of a little bit, well, we were all, in a sense, almost a family. And the fact that had happened to one of the young kids that was always usually running around with such a lot of brightness and everything, had an impact on the whole community. And so there were at least a couple of whole community meetings about it, where it was talked about, and people talked about him and his bringing out, his brightness, his sparkle, his this, his that. And that was very meaningful. And it was sad, and it continued for a while that way, but then, we all went back to our own lives and sort of tried to integrate that into our lives too.
And the building, the Quiet House, was part of that integration, wasn't it?
That's right. One of the special people connected to us was Alex Reed, who was a very talented guy and would often come and talk to the Albers and talk to us, and was sort of had a close connection. And he was also kind of smitten by what happened and wanted to have something creative happen in response to it. So, talking about, and I would say also that both he and Mrs. Albers and my mother and my father, and occasionally me, would join on Sundays in sort of a Quaker quiet meeting. And so we thought, what about if we create a space where anybody who wants to, in this kind of tumultuous setting that we're all in, could go and just be quiet and be open to what comes to them when they're quiet like that. So there was sort of some fundraising, and Alex Reed said he would do it, and he was a very artistic guy, and so he really created some wonderful stone patterns, and there were these benches which are here now, and I'm so glad they were saved. I just sat on them this morning, and it felt kind of good to sit in them again, that connection. But then people could go there, and then they could go for totally any other reason, of course, to be quiet. But that was the knowledge, and now it has a very different kind of function, and it's been expanded and built up and remodeled, and there's a place where people live and maybe do other activities. But it was meaningful at that time.
So, in thinking about the college and how the community functioned, you also mentioned the bulletin board that served as a different kind of center. Talk about that bulletin board.
Well, over at Blue Ridge, there was an enormous bulletin board in the Lee Hall lobby. And there was, I think there was one section that was supposed to be reserved for faculty announcements or something like that. But then there was another section where it was just open for whatever, anybody could put up ideas or things like that. And so that was a wonderful way people could come and look and have an idea and write something, and it became sort of just a communication mechanism, I think, and it was really, really good in that way. And then Bob Wunsch, who was the drama teacher and who became rector after John Andrew Rice left, but who always was having a kind of a positively toned communication during general meetings and things like that. He made use of the bulletin board to put up ideas and thoughts and observations, and he began setting this tone of using it as just a very meaningful way of community communication and keeping in touch with whoever's interested. When we moved to Lake Eden, there wasn't as much space. So it ended up that there was, in the entry to the studies building, as you enter on the right, there was quite a bit of bulletin board. And then down in the dining hall, when you entered, we also had quite a large, moderately large bulletin board there. So that was set up that way, and the things that were a little bit more academically or philosophically oriented would tend to be up in the studies building one, and practical other kinds of things down at the one just inside the dining hall entry. But also, since music happened there and drama happened there, there was sort of an overlap of those kind of comments coming up too.
Yeah.
But it was kind of fun, and people would come in and they'd look and they'd read and they'd sort of feel in touch with what was going on.
I love that idea. So you mentioned John Andrew Rice. Do you have any memories of Rice?
Yes, I do. He was some general memories of him just being quite a presence there. But then I have some sort of little childhood memories too of, and he would, in the, up above, in the back of Lee Hall, it's different now because they've modified the ground, but there used to be sort of a little space there where you could put chairs on that uphill side. So he often would be sitting there in a chair, smoking his pipe, looking at something he wanted to read, and looking around at everybody. And he was sort of available if people wanted to talk to him, or also he was just there too, right? So, and I think he liked the idea that somehow this became a whole community area, both on the sunroof above his head there, and out in the lawn too. So he would, in order to sort of attract the kids, he would often have candy, and so he would bring candy, and so we would go up and get candy from him, and that was sort of fun. and that was fun. And then I did have one little encounter with him that wasn't quite so fun, but when went below, he was having what was to him a very important meeting, I think, and I don't know if it was a class or whatever, but it was in the building down below. If you were on the porch at Blue Ridge, and it would be down to the right, and there was a roofed walkway that went down there. But we kids would play around in there, and we often played up in the attic of that building and stuff like that. But he at this time was having a class down in the basement, and when I went in, I sort of noticed the class, but then I totally forgot about it. So when I came out, I was just making noises and singing and stuff like that. And he really, I think he had maybe told me before, giving me a shh kind of signal, but then I had forgotten. So then he got really furious, and he left his class and chased me all the way up, and, all the way up through the covered walkway into the beginning of that underground space there, and then I didn't have anywhere else to go. So he sort of grabbed me and shook me a little bit. I told you to be quiet now. And why didn't you? Something like that. I said, I didn't know what to say. But then he said, okay, just remember. And then he went back to his class. So for a little while I didn't go back and have candy from him, but then I did. So I feel a little bad to bring this up, but it does, I mean, he was somebody who had kind of spontaneous energy that would come up, I think, and from my later understandings too, that his willingness to sort of go out on a limb, to be in charge of what you think is the right thing to do, or is worth experimenting, or is worth trying. And he was willing to take risks that way. And that's what helped get Black Mountain going. So I should be really doing a little bit of appreciation of those abilities too. Though he had got him into trouble, into interactive trouble sometimes, but he was also ready to listen to people too. So I think his thoughts of, say what you think, but listen too. So I think that was some of my experience with that.
And it's wonderful to hear those stories because it really paints a more multifaceted portrait of these figures that now we can only read about.
Yeah.
You sort of get to see their complexities as a human. There was quite a few discussions, quite a few events that led up to both your father and the Alvarez's leaving Black Mountain College. I wonder if you might give us sort of your recollection of either specific events or the feelings that led up to those departures.
And I'm not very refreshed on the technical points, so this will be just partially communicative. But there were, it was a hard time for the college financially. Of course, there was almost always a hard time, and then there would be particularly a group of people who would get gathered and sort of create a bit of a disturbance and say, well, if you don't agree with us, we're going to leave, or something, and then they would leave. But my dad, I guess, particularly just felt responsible to keep this college going somehow. And it had become a little bit less rewarding for him in other terms, I think. And he's a little bit tired from having put a whole lot of energy into it. But it was a very meaningful community to him too, also. So I wish I could give a little more comprehensive picture of this, but I think when I guess there was a real financial crisis, now that I'm remembering a little bit, that developed after some of the finances that had come through paying for veterans coming had helped keep the college going and supporting and reduced the great crisis situation that almost always was there. Otherwise, where is the next money going to come from? So I think that had started to taper off one way or another. And so there was a question, could the college go on? And I think my father...
Hold on just a second. Could the college go on and then just start after that? Okay.
So there was a question, could the college go on? And I think my father said, well, I have to be honest with people and let them know that this question is even more imminent than it has been, or it's always been part of our atmosphere we've had to live with. It's even more imminent now. And so that created different, I think, quite a scuffle of, there was sort of panicky feelings on the one hand, annoyed feelings with the administration sort of not solving everything. And so then people would start to have these little meetings, separate meetings, and sort of certain factions kind of developed, or little certain groups. And because it was thought, well, if Ted Dreier isn't going to keep solving everything the way he as treasurer had, or the way he, when he stepped over to be briefly the rector, had, why then, then we have to, well, how are we going to do it? So it was kind of a panicky, I think I would call it panicky, grouping and discussing, and it was always easier to sort of be critical and angry rather than to say, oh, how can we solve this together, or something like that. So tensions built up thereby, and I think that then this included also the Albers in a way, because they thought we don't want to devote our full energy, which should be creating art and things like that, into just dealing with scrambles and fights and struggles. And then I think Ray Dreier got in there at one point too, and in a sort of a different way, and he had a kind of attempt, good-hearted guy, I think, basically, but he would have these kind of temperamental emphases that would come up sometimes. So my memory is that things felt unsettled, and there was uncertainty about what would happen, and I think there was an effort. My father thought what really is needed now is a new administrator, because I don't think I'm going to keep doing it. So he did arrange to have Mr. Pittenger, who had been an administrator in the Northeast institution up here, I forget which one, to agree to come and do that. And so I think that arrangement was made. And then he thought, well, then at least I could go without feeling I hadn't handed the responsibility to anybody. And so people were not very happy with that solution. And I think it worked for most of a year to some extent, but then he was asked to leave, and then other little factions came up. And then gradually then Olson kind of emerged as a way. He said, why don't we just sell land and then write poetry? Something like that. I don't, that's maybe oversimplifying it. But I thought, he says, oh, there's a great many resources here, and maybe we can find a way to create money from them, and then still have the artistic and poetic life go on, which did work out for a number of years, but then it kind of faded.
You were sort of internal to all that. You saw your father's reaction to leaving firsthand. I mean, what did it feel like to you and him and your family to leave?
I felt sad to not be able to continue with what was very meaningful to me, because Charlotte Schlesinger, my special music teacher, was going, Alva's artistic teacher was going. I didn't know if Miss Cunningham, anyway, that wasn't going to be a really livable survival profession for me anyway, but it was meaningful learning experience from him. So with a lot of the key people leaving, and I was also starting to think, gosh, how am I going to earn a living? Where am I going to focus my life now? So it was part of that kind of growth too. And I didn't really see a clear pathway that Black Mountain was going to help me with that. So then I went back to having been accepted at Harvard and worked my way into going back there. And majored in music and the rest of that story. Yeah.
You mentioned before the interview that that there was almost, you said maybe a sense of relief. Your father had a sense of relief about leaving. So could you talk about that maybe a little bit?
Well, I'm sure it was a mixed feeling. He, on the one hand, was devoted to the ideals of Black Mountain College and the people he had worked with there in pursuit of these ideals. But somewhat accepting of the fact that there were fluctuations and changes, and none of us can control everything. And so that, in a sense, most people were just saying, you know, you deal with the money problems while we enjoy ourselves, or something like that, or pursue what's really interesting to us. He said, you know, first of all, I don't think I can do it all by myself, so we need to have a little bit more of an administrative structure of some kind. And so I think that, but then, so in a way, it was a relief to be out of that situation. But Black Mountain was a very, very meaningful part of his life, so it was sad to leave it in a way too. But then he kind of developed other focuses later. It took a transition period for them.
Sure. Would you say a little bit about how Black Mountain College changed during the years there, if it changed, or maybe you changed with it?
Well, during the years that I was there, I felt mostly very enriched and rewarded by the teachers that I was experiencing with. Rimba Schlesinger, Joseph Albers, Merce Cunningham, and then a whole bunch of others, Max Dane in mathematics, and giving me a sense of how you could be enthusiastic about mathematics, which instead of just drilled down by it. And Erwin Bodke playing along with, sort of really enjoying his the music he could bring into the keyboard that way. And even Ron Toller, who had been a treasurer for a while, but also taught Latin and was willing to sort of help me enjoy Latin and learn Latin and learn to some of these things I had been singing without really knowing the language too much. It was found enriching to me. And so there was a great resource of people and teachers there, which I was mainly focused on. You know, there was then, at the end of the last year that I was there, the spring of 1949, this kind of growing panic. But since I was son of Ted Dreier Sr., I think I was not included much in the student discussions of that. Though once in a while somebody would say, I really think you should at least know that we are wondering about what's going to happen in the future here, and that what's going to happen, and if your father isn't here, what's going to happen, and or should he be made to leave, or something like that. So I think that when he was actually then asked to leave, that it was a relief. That part of it was a relief to him. But part of it was a sadness too, that all the years of effort that he had put into in helping create this and maintain it were not appreciated, or he wasn't given any real appreciation for that.
So I have a sort of final question, but I want to actually get in a little bit about your impressions of Merce Cunningham, because I don't want to leave that out, and Max Dane as well. So will you talk a little bit about Merce Cunningham first?
Yeah, I have a little poem that I wrote about him. My experience, one of my experiences there. And I'll read the poem and then I'll talk a little bit. This is called Merce. Merce Cunningham shows right arm up, left arm out to the side, says shoulders down, Ted. Good. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Pause. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Still.
So talk a little bit about that. What does that mean? What was his teaching style?
His teaching style was he was not very verbally affluent, but to show, and he would show with his arms and things like that what we should do, and then to have a rhythm and to have a body awareness, so that if we didn't know that our shoulder was up and that it wasn't the right position, that it should have the shoulder down or something like that. And yet he sort of, through awareness, visual awareness of what was happening, would help us become in the present and somehow more expressive, able to express through our bodies what we could do by just being aware of what was in our bodies. And so it was a wonderful teacher, just great.
And then Max Day, you said, gave you this experience of the excitement of mathematics. What was he like as a teacher?
He, he was a short little guy with white hair and a German accent, but twinkle in his eye, and he enjoyed somehow the presence of being aware of what was happening in mathematics as a form or as a pressure or something like that, or at least that sort of came across. So that made some impression on me when he was saying, okay, so you see the graph goes like this, or so he would sort of, that kind of caught my attention. Now he would give us good, precise attention on the mathematics too, but he somehow conveyed to us that all this technicality and learning the technical parts of the mathematics, you don't have to get entangled in that. You can get a sense of what it's really trying to do. And there was a beyond. And there was, of course, a lot of more advanced mathematics that he was so tuned into that we didn't know anything about, that he just wanted to open for us this possibility that it was there. And that stayed with me, even though I never got too much into all that math.
And that seems to be something that unites a lot of the Black Mountain College teachers, the dynamism and then a sense of the beyond, the significance of what day-to-day learning was going for. So you grew up at Black Mountain College. How would you compare your childhood conception of Black Mountain College to your later teenage and adult impressions? Did it change in any way?
Well, my later teenage was also including the Black Mountain College. Well, I mean, there were different elements in it, and the whole atmosphere in the college changed in how it impacted me just through the environmental changes to some extent. I mean, being on the Blue Ridge campus and seeing that wonderful view. But of course we all did hiking too, and my dad took me on hikes all in the mountains and stuff like that. So I felt engaged in the mountains, and we did that from Lake Eden too. But it was a little less vivid visually from when we moved from this high spot where you could have mountain views and great views to down by a lake with mountains above you, but all entangled in interesting art and other things going on too. So there was that kind of change. And then follow up with a question again.
Oh yeah, so did you experience, is there a difference between your childhood conceptions of Black Mountain College and the way you experienced it later as a teenager?
Well, I mean, as a teenager, I felt I could get in and be engaged much more. So that when I first went as a young teenager to over to the Lake Eden campus, I learned to drive a dump truck and took the and that helped save the farm money, and so I was welcomed by that little brief corner of administration. And so that was fun to sort of really get in there and learn to do that. And I also went in and learned to brush down the beef cattle and stuff like that, and joined in with the farmers. And then I had my pet goats, and I kept asking the farmer little guidances for them and things like that. And I had to come over and milk them, and I felt part of that whole thing a little bit more by being part of that. And Molly Gregory, who was in charge of the shop as well as also in charge of the farm for a while and things, all administrative roles as well. She welcomed me into the shop and taught me how to use a saw and use a power saw carefully and all these kind of things. So I felt I was sort of growing up and learning that kind of thing.
Yeah. So then how would you maybe compare those impressions to your recollections now? What about, you know, what you learned at Black Mountain has stayed with you or influenced the way that you live your life?
Well, that's, it encompasses quite a few things, I think. One general impression is that one doesn't have to be sort of narrowed down in one selection of interests, so to speak. That one can enjoy art, one can enjoy music, one can enjoy dance, one can enjoy driving a dump truck, one can, there's so much of life that one can just be part of. And that Black Mountain helped me experience all the little corners of these various things. And I thank it so much for doing that. And that has kind of stayed with me as I became more specialized and focused in other ways. But I've continued to enjoy hiking and stuff like that. And I continued to play the cello up until just a few years ago. I and my wife now still singing the Harvard Radcliffe chorus. So we're right into music still, and so it. I just feel it opened me up to being sensitive and then able to enjoy lots of things. And then when problems arise and there's tumult or struggles or something like that, that it doesn't have to be the end of the world. Though it can be pretty uncomfortable when it's happening.
It's a very good lesson to learn. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would want to talk about or cover before we... is there anything that we haven't talked about or covered only briefly that you would want to talk about before we end?
Well, I would just mention, we haven't actually mentioned Black Mountain College Museum and Arts Center, where I am now, and it is just such a wonderful experience to me to come and have reawakened, a reawakening of that kind of meaningful learning experience I had, meaningful life experience that I had. So obviously I know everybody has to live in their own present, but if there's a kind of recording of art, music, poetry, things like that, which somehow have an enlivening aspect of them, and if there's a way of making that available to people, so that they can see how it might relate in a creative way to their own life. I think that's terrific. Now, of course, nothing can last forever, but I, anyway, hope this goes on.
Thank you so much, Ted. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure for me, too.
Did it? Whenever we're ready, we're rolling.
So you wanted to read a poem about Albers. Why don't you go ahead and do that now?
I did want to read a poem about Joseph Albers, and there's Annie Albers too, of course, but that was such an important part of my experience at Black Mountain, and I want to express it. This is a very short poem, but I will try to get at part of the essence of what I experienced with Albers. New vision at Black Mountain College. This I learned from Albers at BMC. Be aware. Yes, be aware. Yes, be aware now and begin to see. Albers had this way of just bringing us into the present and what we could see now. And that fit in with the whole approach at Black Mountain College to some extent. But one way he would get us to see that is, I think once, he would quickly set up a drawing class where we'd all draw a model that he had set up in a certain position, and he put the head way down below the shoulders. Then we'd look at all the papers, and whoa, some of the heads are above the shoulders. So it shows we weren't really seeing, we weren't really there in the present and observing what was there. And he came back to this again and again, and it was such a vivid part of the learning in his class, and that kind of thing. And it brought this great enthusiasm to it, and he would show us things, and this color here and this color there, and it affects that, you see? And he would give us tasks that we should affect influencing of colors. And I made some little X's of just paper. It was paper colored, so we knew that it was the same color, but then we would put it on contrasting backgrounds and see how different we could make it look. And I did that with some little X's. He said, very good, wonderful, you got the point. And we learned how to do that, and he engaged all his classes that way, and it was just wonderful. And then he had other classes, Verclair classes and things where we would bring in things from outside and see how moss and rocks and smoothness and everything could see. And then when we walked outside, our eyes were opened in a new way, in a new presence. So he brought a lot of that to the college, and it was just such a big thing. And it was wonderful.
And what about Annie?
And Annie was, once she brought the weaving, of course, and she was intellectually a little more sophisticated in her language, but also very sensitive, and she had a sense of humor too. So they were a wonderful combination somehow. It was great. I didn't work so directly with Annie, but Bill Reed did, and made these wonderful, tactilely sensitive woven materials, and it was with the color and the texture interacting, and she brought that awareness to so much of the college community too. So that was really great. Yeah.
And then another woman who was a dynamic force in school was your mother. Will you talk about your mother? What was her name?
My mother, also a dynamic force in the school, Barbara Lawrence Dreier. And she had no official position, but she was very present and very active. And she would have tea and invite important, relevant people to tea, and they would have wonderful conversations. Yeah. And she was somebody that people could turn to almost as a counselor, because she was so present and so understanding and so imaginative and so wanting a positive outcome to come. And so it was fun. And then she became very engaged in the community too. We have a picture of her when there was a costume party, when we were all supposed to make costumes that would somehow vividly change us or vividly show something of interest. And she had this great aluminum headgear that Joseph Albers made for her, and she wore it, and it was a great success at that evening costume party. And it was a wonderful way that somehow the whole community got involved in enhanced awareness of art, enhanced awareness of what we see now. It's not just what we've been told is good, what we've been told is important, and that we should feel less of it, but be aware. What do you see now? All right, yeah, okay, all right, you told me something I didn't know, said the teacher or something. You observed it. That's good. Keep observing. Keep being right here now, in the present. So that was one of the things Black Mountain brought to us. And it was so great.
Anything else?
Have you spoken about particular students who you developed close relationships with, or friendships with?
Well, there were a lot of students that were important. One was, that comes to my mind pretty quickly, is Alexander Reed, also known as Bill Reed, who was an artist and who was a friend of Alba's and of our family in particular. But he just was very creative, and he would take, for instance, a stone and paint on it a wonderful picture of a fern or something like that. And he gave it to us, something, and we had that, and it's just very beautiful. So now, and it enhances that stone. And then he went on and became a teacher at MIT and Watt and things like that. But he was special. Then there was just a great variety of students. There's a whole variety. There was Bela Martin, who played Death in, what was that poem?
Danse Macabre?
Danse Macabre. He was the lead figure in that. And he was a big, husky guy who, because he didn't want to have a narrow football player's life, decided not to go and be a football hero somewhere, but came to Black Mountain to enhance his artistic sensitivity. And he had joined in everything there. And he played Danse Macabre. And I was in that poem too, so this, I became part of that too. And it was just wonderful, being right in part of it too. It was great. And there was just lots of people, lots of lady people too. Just all smiles, sparkling some of the time, coming up, weeping some of the time, but with a readiness to express and share emotions. It was lovely there.
Have y'all talked about the summer of 1948?
I don't believe so.
Were you there at Black Mountain during the summer of 1948?
Oh yes, sure.
What do you recall about that summer?
I loved Bucky Fuller. He was lots of fun, and he joined in that evening performance with Merce Cunningham too, who I was studying with too. And but Bucky was great. He could just speak endlessly for hours, but he had this imagination, and he created these, this sense of space and encompassing everything. I forget a lot of the details of his architectural mastery, but I remember seeing that he engaged people in trying to create these structures, and that was fun too. I really enjoyed him, and he was part of the community, very much part of the community, pitched right in, joined the plays, and things like that too. Anybody else?
Anything else we've forgotten?
Well, Black Mountain was a special experience for me, and it's been just lovely to refocus on it and rethink about it.
How
But I
about
think it's especially just gave me permission to try to be interested in anything, you know, anything that was around me. Art, music, dance, everything. Things I disagree with, take another look at it. Be aware, you know. Don't jump to conclusions about things. Don't try to exclude anything. So, I mean, Albus would, for instance, have us bring in muddy things, or things that usually think, yuck, we don't want to bring that in. But he says, you know.
Sounds great. So, whenever we're ready, we're rolling.
So you wanted to read a poem about Albers. Why don't you go ahead and do that now?
I did want to read a poem about Joseph Albers, and there's Annie Albers too, of course, but that was such an important part of my experience at Black Mountain, and I want to express it. This is a very short poem, but it will try to get at part of the essence of what I experienced with Albers. New vision at Black Mountain College. This I learned from Albers at BMC. Be aware, yes, be aware. Yes, be aware now and begin to see. Albers had this way of just bringing us into the present and what we could see now. And that fitted in with the whole approach at Black Mountain College to some extent. But one way he would get us to see that is, I think once, you know, he would quickly set up a drawing class where we'd all draw a model that he had set up in a certain position, and he put the head way down below the shoulders. Then we'd look at all the papers, and whoa, some of the heads are above the shoulders. So it shows we weren't really seeing, we weren't really there in the present and observing what was there. And he came back to this again and again. And it was such a vivid part of the learning in his class and that kind of thing. And it brought this great enthusiasm to it. And he would show us things, and this color here and this color there, and it affects that, you see? And he would give us tasks that we should affect influencing of colors. And I made some little X's of just paper. It was paper colored, so we knew that it was the same color, but then we would put it on contrasting backgrounds and see how different we could make it look. And I did that with some little X's, and he said, very good, wonderful, you got the point. And we learned how to do that, and he engaged all his classes that way, and it was just wonderful. And then he had other classes, Verclair classes and things, where we would bring in things from outside and see how moss and rocks and smoothness and everything could see. And then when we walked outside, our eyes were opened in a new way, in a new presence. So he brought a lot of that to the college, and it was just such a big thing. And it was wonderful.
And what about Annie?
And Annie she brought the weaving, of course, and she was intellectually a little more sophisticated in her language, but also very sensitive, and she had a sense of humor too. So they were a wonderful combination somehow. It was great. I didn't work so directly with Annie, but Bill Reed did, and made these wonderful, tactilely sensitive, woven materials, and that was with the color and the texture interacting, and she brought that awareness to so much of the college community too. So that was really great, yeah.
And then another woman who was a dynamic force in the school, it was your mother. Will you talk about your mother? What was her name?
My mother, also a dynamic force in the school, Barbara Dreier, Barbara Loynes Dreier.
And she had no official position, but she was very present and very active. And she would have tea and invite important, relevant people to tea, and they would have wonderful conversations there. And she was somebody that people could turn to almost as a counselor, because she was so present and so understanding and so imaginative and so wanting a positive outcome to come. And so it was fun. And then she became very engaged in the community too. We have a picture of her when there was a costume party, when we were all supposed to make costumes that would somehow vividly change us or vividly show something of interest. And she had this great aluminum headgear that Joseph Albers made for her, and she wore it, and it was a great success at that evening costume party. And it was a wonderful way that somehow the whole community got involved in enhanced awareness of art, enhanced awareness of what we see now. It's not just what we've been told is good, what we've been told is important, and that we should feel thus and that, but be aware. What do you see now? All right, yeah, okay, all right, you told me something I didn't know, said the teacher or something. You observed it. That's good. Keep observing. Keep being right here now, in the present. So that was one of the things Black Mountain brought to us. And it was so great.
Anything else?
Have you spoken about particular students who you developed close relationships with, friendships with?
Well, there were a lot of students that were important. One was, it comes to my mind pretty quickly, is Alexander Reed, also known as Bill Reed, who was an artist and who was a friend of Albers and of our family in particular. But he just was very creative, and he would take, for instance, a stone and paint on it a wonderful picture of a fern or something like that, and he gave it to us, something, and we have that, and it's just very beautiful somehow, and it enhances that stone. And then he went on, he became a teacher at MIT and art and things like that. But he was special. Then there was just a great variety of students. There's a whole variety. There was Bela Martin, who played Death in, what was that poem? Danse Macabre. He was the lead figure in that. And he was a big, husky guy who, because he didn't want to have a narrow football player's life, decided not to go and be a football hero somewhere, but came to Black Mountain to enhance his artistic sensitivity. And he joined in everything there. And he played Danse Macabre. And I was in that poem too, so this, I became part of that too. And it was just wonderful, being right in part of it too. It was great. And there was just lots of people, lots of lady people too. And just all smiles sparkling some of the time, coming up, weeping some of the time, but with a readiness to express and share emotions. That was lovely there.
Have y'all talked about the summer of 1948? Were you there at Black Mountain during the summer of 1948 when Buckminster Fuller?
Oh yes, sure.
What do you recall about that summer?
I loved Bucky Fuller. He was lots of fun, and he joined in that evening performance with Merce Cunningham too, who I was studying with too. And but Bucky was great. He could just speak endlessly for hours, but he had this imagination, and he created these, this sense of space and encompassing everything. I forget a lot of the details of his architectural mastery, but I remember seeing that he engaged people in trying to create these structures, and that was fun too. I really enjoyed him, and he was part of the community, very much part of the community, pitched right in, joined the plays and things like that too. Anybody else?
Anything else we've forgotten?
Well, Black Mountain was a special experience for me, and it's been just lovely to refocus on it and rethink about it and awaken it. But I think it especially just gave me permission to try to be interested in anything, anything that was around me, art, music, dance, everything. Things I disagree with, take another look at it. Be aware, Don't jump to conclusions about things. Don't try to exclude anything. So, Albus would, for instance, have us bring in muddy things, or things that usually think, yuck, we don't want to bring that in. But he says, see how this person put these two things together? It creates a different feeling about that mud, right? And he would have us learn to influence from what was right next to something, not only color, but also texture and things like that. And that was the whole, I forget, Verclair, I think they call that, yeah. It was very enriching in life to do that.
Ted, he called it matière.
Matière.
Was it right?
Also that word came in too, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he was very special in that way, yeah.
Do you remember the student Ruth Asawa?
Absolutely. She was close to our family, and when I went out to San Francisco to intern, or I went and saw her and Albert Lanier, and they were friends, and she was very close and very meaningful.
What kind of a person was she? What was her personality like?
She was, sometimes she would seem to be kind of quiet without a lot of special expression on her face, but then her eyes would brighten up and her little face would start to smile a little. But there was nothing repelling about that. It was more that her attention was somehow what she was looking at or what she was feeling within, or something like that. And she was just a wonderful person. And she was wonderful with her hands, and she created all these wonderful wire sculptures, and we had some of those. And she was just a beautiful person to know somehow. But it took a while to get to know her, because there was a certain quietness about her, I think. But I just really felt close to her all my life, even though I've never seen her for years. She was just a lovely person.
How about Hazel Larson Archer, or Hazel Frida Larson?
Yes, Hazel Frida Larson Archer. I liked Hazel a lot too. I so admired her photography, and was sometimes joining her in some photography classes that we had with some of the great photographers that came during the summertime. And then we admired what she created so much, and it was just terrific. But she had this, I mean, she was crippled from earlier polio, I think. But it didn't stop her from just moving to do what she wanted to do, what she thought would be artistically relevant. So she would push herself to do that, and it was good. And but she was, what's the right word? But persistent in her thinking. There's going to be something meaningful that I find here, and how can I find it? I'll shape this. I'll cut this off. I'll bring this. I'll focus on this. And there was somehow this whole approach was very creative, and I admired it very much. And there was a kind of a twinkle in her eye too, so I enjoyed that.
Would you want to speak about Charles Forberg and Ati?
Charles Forberg and Ati were people who met at Black Mountain and were very meaningful in our lives too. Charles Forberg ended up going into architecture, but he did a lot of artistic work there and creative work, and worked in the, he got his hands into things. He maybe drove the tractor, or we had at one point, I think, a thing with Caterpillar tracks that you could clear the roads with, and he learned to do that. So he got his hands into things too, and learned all these practical matters. And I think he had some difficult times emotionally for a while, and then he came back, and he somehow, through Black Mountain, I think he developed a great sense of confidence, and confidence in himself, and through his work with Albers and all, the sense in creating meaningful structures. And then when the buildings were being built, he sort of joined in that in a creative way too. And then Ati Gropius, who then later became Ati Gropius Forberg, who she was just a delightful, talented person, and close to our family too, and sparkling, and very imaginative in the colors that she would produce in paintings, and so dynamic and so interesting and lovely too, and became close members of our family. Even was a godmother of one of my brothers who died later, or something like that. But close family members, and we knew the Gropiuses too, so it was nice connection. But she was one of the very special people at Black Mountain. And since I knew her a little, and when I first went there as a student, and then we were all, I kind of, and she was going with Charles at that time, I sort of would sit with them some of the time at a concert or something like that. I felt a little bonded, helped me move away from my parents to sort of be connected with them a little, and that was fun. But I mean, I could move around to other places certainly too. But that was sort of fun. We felt a little bit of sort of semi-family-like things together, so that was good. Anybody else that we're thinking of?
Ray Johnson?
Yeah, I remember Ray. He was fun too. He sort of had these special thoughts and opinions. And he'd have a little twinkle in his eye when he said them, because he would tend to maybe state something that sounded a little like a dogmatic statement, but with a twinkle in his eye, you know, there was room for conversation. So that was kind of fun. And then he created very sort of impactful drawings and everything too. So I really appreciated that.
Todd's here. I guess
So we can end it there.
I did lose video.
Thank you, thank you.
But the audio was, yeah, so, I mean, yeah.
Excellent. So we would, you know, in any sort of finished piece, this would go in the center. You
Yes,
know?
yes,
We'd put it in
good.
the center with the other recollections.
Okay, good.
And then you'd have your ending already.
Okay,
Did
all
everything.
right,
So
all
great.
right.
Wonderful. I'm glad we got that in there.
Yes, I am too.
Yeah.
Very good,
Good.
good, thank you for that.
Great, okay.
All righty. Right,
We're very pleased.
okay.
And I sat on Molly's bench
Oh, yes.
the whole time.
Oh,
And every time I moved, it squeaked. And I was very nervous about that. And they said, yes, they did hear it a few times.